Uncover the hidden layers of Ronald and Penelope's seemingly perfect life as unsettling changes lead Ronald down a path of doubt and discovery. Delve into a story where each turn unveils deeper secrets and challenges the very foundation of a family. What will Ronald find as he peels back the veneer of domestic bliss? Watch as secrets come to light and decisions must be made. Can a marriage survive the ultimate test of trust? Tune in to witness a tale of love, betrayal, and the search for truth. The sun peeks over the horizon, casting its first gentle rays into a small, tidy kitchen where the smell of freshly brewed coffee begins to mingle with the crisp morning air. Ronald, a robust man with a knack for precision from his years as a draftsman, stands over a sizzling pan, carefully flipping pancakes. His focus is meticulous, much like the detailed drawings he creates at work. Penelope, her hair wrapped in a loose bun, slides into the kitchen with a quiet grace. "Morning, Ron. It smells wonderful in here," she says, her voice carrying a sleepy warmth as she reaches for the coffee pot. "Good morning, Penny. I thought I'd get a start on breakfast before the girls wake up." "How did you sleep?" Ronald asks, serving a golden pancake onto a plate he passes to her. "Like a log. Those new curtains really block out the light," she replies, taking a sip of her coffee, her eyes lighting up with appreciation for the small comfort. As they settle into their morning routine, the sounds of footsteps announce the arrival of their twin daughters, Roxy and Rachel, who rush into the kitchen with the boundless energy of youth. Roxy, with her untamed curls, grabs a seat at the table, while Rachel, more reserved, helps herself to a glass of milk. "Is there syrup, Dad?" Roxy chirps, eagerly eyeing the stack of pancakes. "Right in front of you, Princess," Ronald chuckles, pointing to the syrup bottle near her plate. He loves these moments, their simple breakfast chatter filling the room with life. Penelope watches them with a fond smile, then turns to Ronald, her expression softening. "You know, I was thinking we could take the girls to the lake this weekend. A little picnic, maybe some fishing. What do you think?" Ronald meets her gaze, the corners of his eyes crinkling with a smile. "That sounds perfect. The girls would love that, wouldn't you?" he says, turning towards Roxy and Rachel, who nod enthusiastically, mouths full of pancake. As breakfast continues, the family discusses plans for the weekend, interspersed with laughter and playful banter. This home, with its modest decorations and worn furniture, holds more than just the daily routines of a family. It is a vessel of their shared memories and love. Once the meal ends and the girls scurry off to prepare for school, Ronald and Penelope share a quiet moment, cleaning up together. "Penny, I'm glad we're doing this. Making time for little adventures," Ronald says earnestly, rinsing a dish. Penelope reaches over to squeeze his hand briefly, a silent acknowledgement of their enduring partnership. "Me too, Ron. It's these little things that keep us grounded, isn't it?" she muses, her voice a blend of nostalgia and hope. This chapter sets the stage for the narrative, depicting the loving, if not entirely perfect domestic life of Ronald and Penelope, highlighting the deep roots of their relationship and the seemingly unshakable foundation they've built with their daughters. But beneath the surface of this idyllic domestic scene, subtle undercurrents hint at changes that may challenge the stability they cherish. The rhythm of daily life in Ronald's small, cherished home began subtly shifting, like the slow changing of seasons only noticeable in hindsight. These changes were small, innocuous on their own, but together they wove a pattern that Ronald could not quite understand. Penelope had always been a social butterfly, but her outings with her friend Sally started extending well into the evenings, something that was new. One particular Tuesday, Ronald noticed how Penelope's usual casual wear had been replaced by a more carefully curated outfit, her demeanor tinged with a nervous excitement that seemed out of place for a simple get-together. "Going out with Sally again tonight?" Ronald asked as he watched Penelope apply her lipstick with more precision than usual. "Yes, she found this new book club. I think it will be fun to meet some new people," Penelope replied, avoiding his gaze in the mirror. Her voice held a cheerfulness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's the third time this month, isn't it?" Ronald probed gently, trying to keep his tone light, but a hint of concern crept through. Penelope paused, her lipstick mid-air. Is it? I guess we've just been getting caught up with all these amazing authors we're discovering, she said, finally turning to look at him with a forced smile. Another change was the arrival of discreet packages that Penelope quickly tucked away before Ronald could see their contents. However, one evening, a sleek black lingerie set slipped out from one of the hastily closed drawers as Ronald was searching for a pair of scissors. The luxurious fabric and elegant design were unlike the practical items Penelope usually favored. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Ronald turned towards Penelope, the image of the lingerie burning in his mind. Penny, can I ask you something? That new lingerie, it's quite different from your usual style, he said cautiously, not wanting to sound accusing but needing to understand. Oh, that? It was on sale, and I thought, why not treat myself a bit? Penelope replied, her voice too casual. You know, sometimes a little change is good. Ronald nodded, trying to accept her explanation, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. He lay awake long after Penelope fell asleep, the whispers of change echoing in his mind, a crescendo building slowly to a truth he was not yet ready to face. As days turned into weeks, these whispers grew louder. Penelope's phone, which had always been left carelessly around the house, now seemed to be always within her reach or tucked away in her purse. Ronald noticed muted conversations, quick glances thrown his way, and an air of secrecy that formed a palpable barrier between them. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Ronald decided to breach the subject again, hoping to clear the air. Penny, is everything all right? You seem different lately, he ventured, watching her closely as he dried a plate. Penelope stiffened, her back to him as she washed the dishes. I'm fine, Ronald. Just the usual busy with the girls in the house. You don't need to worry, she replied, her voice strained. Ronald set the plate down, his concern deepening. He knew Penelope well enough to sense when something was amiss, and whatever was happening now felt like it was slowly pulling them apart, thread by thread. As he looked at her rigid posture, Ronald felt the first real sting of fear that the changes he noticed might lead to consequences neither of them were prepared for. As autumn's palette painted the town in shades of orange and red, Ronald found the colors of his own life dimming, clouded by a growing unease that gnawed at the edges of his once unwavering trust in Penelope. It wasn't just the lingerie or the late-night outings. It was the accumulation of small, inexplicable changes that started to form a disturbing pattern. One chilly evening, Penelope returned from one of her book club meetings with Sally, later than usual. Ronald heard the car pull up the driveway, and as he glanced at the clock, he noted it was past midnight. His heart sank, a mixture of disappointment and dread settling in as he listened to her keys jingling at the door. Another late one? Ronald asked as Penelope stepped in, her cheeks flushed from the cold or perhaps from something else. Penelope, startled by his presence in the dimly lit hallway, took off her coat and hung it up before turning to face him with a weary smile. Yes, the discussion went on longer than expected. You know how it gets when everyone has strong opinions about the book. Ronald nodded, though his mind raced with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. Must have been quite the book to keep you out this late. It was, actually. Maybe I could tell you about it sometime? Penelope offered, her eyes avoiding his, as she made her way to the kitchen for a glass of water. The next day, Ronald decided to do some laundry while Penelope was out grocery shopping. As he sorted through the clothes, he found a pair of Penelope's underwear, damp and oddly soiled, which she must have missed in her usual rush to do her own laundry. A cold grip of suspicion seized him. It was one thing to suspect, quite another to hold evidence of something amiss. That evening, as they sat quietly watching a show, Ronald couldn't contain the turmoil churning inside him. During a commercial break, he turned to Penelope, holding the soiled garment out of sight behind the couch. Penny, I found these in the laundry today. They were like this when I found them, he said, his voice tight as he revealed the underwear. Can you explain? Penelope's face turned pale, her eyes widening as she looked from the garment to Ronald's troubled face. I don't know. Maybe it's from the gym. You know how intense those spin classes can get, she stammered, her explanation faltering under his steady gaze. Ronald wanted to believe her, to accept any reasonable explanation that would dispel the dark clouds gathering over their marriage. Yet the unease that had been a whisper was now a shout in his mind, impossible to ignore. Spin classes, right? Ronald murmured, more to himself than to her. The space between them on the couch felt like a chasm filled with doubt and unspoken fears. As days passed, Ronald observed more. Penelope's phone, once carelessly left on kitchen counters or the living room table, was now always within her reach or hidden away in her purse. He noticed how she angled the screen away from him when texting, and her hasty retreats to other rooms when receiving certain calls. One afternoon, as Ronald pondered his next steps, he overheard Penelope laughing, a light, carefree sound that had become rare in their bedroom. Quietly, he approached the door, listening as her tone changed to hushed seriousness. "I can't talk long," he heard her whisper. "He's becoming suspicious, I think." Ronald's heart thudded painfully against his ribs. His worst fears were not just fears anymore. They were becoming his reality. He stepped away from the door, his mind racing with confusion and hurt, wondering how the love they had built over so many years could have led to this moment of profound betrayal. The air inside the house felt heavy, saturated with unspoken words and the tension of unaddressed suspicions. Ronald's mind replayed the whisper he had overheard, the undeniable evidence that Penelope was hiding something significant from him. The distance between them had grown, filled with doubts and fears that Ronald could no longer ignore. One evening, after a quiet dinner where the clinks of cutlery seemed unusually loud, Ronald decided it was time to confront the mounting evidence. The twins had been tucked into bed, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the somber mood that had settled between him and Penelope. Penelope was in the living room, her figure silhouetted against the television's glow. Ronald's hands felt clammy as he turned off the TV with the remote, the sudden silence in the room like a void needing to be filled. "Penelope, we need to talk," Ronald began, his voice steady but his heart racing. Penelope turned, her expression wary. "About what, Ron?" she asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone, but her voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. "It's about us, Penny, about what's happening with us. Or rather, what's happening with you," Ronald said, struggling to keep his emotions in check. Penelope sighed, sitting down stiffly on the edge of the sofa. "Ron, I don't understand what you mean. I've told you, my life is just busier now with the girls and the book club." "No, it's not just that," Ronald countered, his frustration rising. "I overheard you talking on the phone. You mentioned that I was becoming suspicious. What should I be suspicious about, Penelope?" Her face drained of color, and she looked away, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "Ron, I didn't mean anything by that. It was just a conversation, nothing serious." "But it is serious, Penny. It's serious when my wife is hiding things from me, when there are secrets that are causing us to drift apart," Ronald pressed, his voice rising despite his attempts to control it. Penelope looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Ron. I never wanted to hurt you. It's just that I've been feeling a bit lost lately and I didn't know how to tell you." "Lost? What does that mean? Why wouldn't you come to me?" Ronald asked, confusion and hurt mingling with his anger. "I don't know, Ron. I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to burden you with it," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Ronald took a deep breath, trying to calm the turmoil inside him. "Penny, whatever it is, we promised to face things together. Remember? No matter what." Penelope nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry. It's just, there's someone else, Ron." The words hit Ronald like a physical blow, his knees weakening as he sat down abruptly beside her. "Someone else," he repeated, the words tasting bitter. "Who?" "It doesn't matter who. It's not what you think. It's not serious. "It was just a mistake," Penelope rushed to explain, her words tumbling out in a desperate attempt to soften the blow. "How long?" Ronald asked, his voice hollow. "A few months. It started just as something casual, but I realized it was a mistake. I ended it, Ron. It's over," she said quickly, reaching out to touch his arm. Ronald pulled away gently, his mind a whirlwind of pain and betrayal. "I need some time, Penny. I need to think about all this." Penelope nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, Ron. I'm so sorry. I truly am." As Ronald stood up and walked towards the door for some air, the foundation of their marriage seemed as fragile as the silence that enveloped the house. The confrontation had laid bare the painful truths hidden beneath the surface, and now both Ronald and Penelope faced the uncertain task of navigating the aftermath of revelations that could change everything. The days following the confrontation were thick with silence and avoidance. Ronald moved through the routines of daily life with a mechanical precision, his mind constantly replaying Penelope's confession and her hesitant explanations. Despite her assurances that it was over, the seed of doubt had sprouted into a gnarling vine of suspicion that choked any remnants of trust. Unable to shake the feeling that there was more to the story, Ronald decided it was time to search for concrete evidence. He needed to know the full extent of the betrayal to gauge the possibility of a future together, or apart. One afternoon, while Penelope was at the grocery store, Ronald sat at the dining table with her laptop open before him. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the keyboard. This breach of privacy weighed heavily on him, but the need for clarity pushed him forward. He began with her email, a place once shared for household management, now a potential minefield of secrets. As he scrolled through mundane messages about school events and sale announcements, a particular email caught his eye, flagged and buried deep in a miscellaneous folder. Ronald clicked on it, his heart pounding in his chest. It was from a name he didn't recognize. Tony. The content was innocuous at first glance, discussing a book recommendation. However, the sign-off, "Looking forward to our next meeting, maybe without the books," sent a cold shiver down Ronald's spine. Just then, he heard the front door. Panicking, he quickly closed the laptop and stood up, facing the kitchen just as Penelope walked in. "Back so soon?" Ronald asked, his voice slightly strained as he tried to appear casual. Penelope, sensing something amiss, narrowed her eyes slightly. "Yes, it was less crowded than usual." "Why? Everything okay here?" she responded, setting down the grocery bags. "Just doing some work on the laptop. It's been acting up a bit." Ronald lied smoothly, hating the ease with which deception came to him now. Penelope nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer, and began to unpack the groceries. Ronald helped, but his mind was elsewhere, racing with the implications of the email. That night, after Penelope went to bed, Ronald lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions and plans. The next morning, he decided he needed more evidence and perhaps professional help. He contacted a private investigator, a move that felt like crossing a point of no return. "I need to know the truth about my wife's activities," Ronald explained to the investigator over the phone, his voice low and urgent. "We'll handle it discreetly. You'll have the information you need to make informed decisions," the investigator assured him. Days passed, and Ronald received periodic updates. Photographs of Penelope meeting with Tony, their body language intimate and familiar, texts exchanged with affectionate emojis, and calls logged at all hours. Each piece of evidence was a hammer blow to the fragile structure of their marriage. Confronted with undeniable proof, Ronald felt a mix of anger and sorrow. He decided it was time to confront Penelope again, not just with suspicions, but with facts. He waited for her in the living room, the printed photographs and text logs laid out on the coffee table, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle he wished he never had to complete. Penelope walked in, stopping short when she saw the setup. Her face paled, her eyes darting from the papers to Ronald's stern face. "What is this, Ronald?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's over, Penelope. I know everything. There's no point in denying it anymore, Ronald said, his voice steady but his heart breaking. Penelope sank into a chair, her defenses crumbling. I'm so sorry, Ronald. I never meant for any of this to happen, she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Ronald felt the sting of tears in his eyes, but held them back. We need to decide what comes next. For us, for our daughters. But whatever it is, it can't be built on lies. The room filled with the sound of Penelope's crying, a mournful echo to the years of love and trust that had been irrevocably tarnished. As Ronald looked at the woman he thought he knew, he realized that their path forward, whether together or apart, would require more honesty and courage than he had ever anticipated. The weight of the truth hung heavily in the air as Penelope's sobs echoed through the living room. Ronald sat opposite her, each piece of evidence spread out before him, serving as a stark reminder of the betrayal. He felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The room felt colder, as if the warmth of their family life had been drained away with each revealed secret. Penelope wiped her tears, her voice breaking as she tried to speak. Ronald, please let me explain. It's not what it looks like. Ronald looked at her, his expression hardening. Not what it looks like? Penelope, I have photos, texts. I've seen enough. What more is there to explain? It started out innocently enough, Penelope began, her voice trembling. Tony and we were just friends from the book club. But one thing led to another, and I made a terrible mistake. I was lonely, Ronald. You were always working, and I felt like I was losing myself in the monotony of everyday life. Ronald's face softened slightly, the hurt evident in his eyes. Loneliness isn't an excuse for betrayal, Penelope. I was here. I was always here. Why didn't you just talk to me? I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought it would pass. I didn't want to burden you with my problems, she replied, her hands fidgeting in her lap. A burden? Is that what our vows meant to you? To only share the good and hide the bad? Ronald's voice rose slightly, a mix of incredulity and pain lacing his words. Penelope shook her head, more tears falling. No, Ronald, it wasn't like that. I was wrong, so wrong, and I'm so sorry. I ended it as soon as I realized the damage it was doing. I was scared of losing you, of losing this family. Ronald sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. But in trying not to lose us, you deceived us, Penny. Can't you see that? Where do we go from here? I don't know, Ronald, but I want to make things right if you'll let me. I'll do anything, Penelope pleaded, her eyes searching his for any sign of forgiveness. Ronald stood up, pacing back and forth as he processed her words. I need time, Penelope. Time to think about all of this. Time to decide if there's anything left for us to save. Penelope nodded, her body slumping as if the weight of her guilt was physically pressing down on her. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll stay with my sister for a while, give you space. That might be best, Ronald agreed quietly. As Penelope stood to leave, he added, We need to talk to the girls. They deserve to know that things might change. Penelope paused, her face stricken. Yes, you're right. They deserve that much. When you're ready, we'll talk to them together. As Penelope left the room, her departure felt like the closing of a chapter in their lives. Ronald sat back down, the silence enveloping him. He looked at the photos and texts once more, each one a sharp jab to his heart. He wondered if the trust they had built over the years could ever be repaired, or if this was truly the end of the life they had known. The future seemed uncertain, and for the first time in a long time, Ronald felt utterly alone. The days following Penelope's temporary departure were a blur for Ronald. The house felt emptier, the silence louder, and each room seemed to echo with remnants of happier times. He was left to grapple with the enormity of what had transpired, his feelings a tangled mess of hurt, betrayal, and a weary longing for normalcy that seemed forever out of reach. Ronald knew he had to stay strong for Roxy and Rachel, the innocent bystanders in this upheaval. Preparing for the conversation he needed to have with them, Ronald rehearsed his words, each iteration a stab at simplifying a situation that was anything but simple. One evening, with the twins finishing their homework in their room, Ronald sat them down in the living room. Their curious eyes, so much like Penelope's, looked up at him with a mix of confusion and concern. "Girls," Ronald began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "I need to talk to you about something important." Rachel, always the more sensitive of the two, tilted her head, her voice tinged with worry. "Is it about Mom? She hasn't been home for a few days." "Yes, it's about Mom," Ronald nodded, pausing to gather his thoughts. "Sometimes even adults face tough times and make mistakes. Mom and I are going through a difficult period right now." Roxy, the more forthright twin, frowned. "Are you guys going to get divorced?" Her blunt question cut straight to the heart of Ronald's fears. "We're not sure yet, Roxy," Ronald admitted, feeling a lump form in his throat. "We both love you very much, and no matter what happens, that will never change. But we need some time to figure things out." Rachel reached out, taking his hand. "We love you both, too. Can we help?" Ronald squeezed her hand, moved by her offer. "Just keep being your wonderful selves. That's all the help we need." The conversation was brief, the girls too young to fully grasp the complexities of adult relationships. Yet their resilience and love provided Ronald with a small comfort amid the storm. In the following days, Ronald reached out to family members seeking both emotional support and advice. His sister, always a pillar of strength, offered words of encouragement. "You need to take care of yourself too, Ron," she advised during a phone call. "Navigating through this will take strength, and you can't pour from an empty cup." Ronald sighed, the weight of his responsibilities as a father, and now a single parent, pressing down on him. "I know, but it's hard. Everything reminds me of her, of us." "Give it time," his sister counseled, "and remember, this isn't something you have to go through alone. We're all here for you." As the reality of his situation settled in, Ronald realized that the path forward would require more than just dealing with his own emotions. He had to consider the well-being of his daughters, the legal ramifications of a potential divorce, and the division of their shared life. One afternoon, he met with a lawyer to discuss his options, the stark office a far cry from the warmth of his home. The lawyer, a pragmatic woman named Ms. Taylor, laid out the scenarios with clinical precision. "Given the circumstances, you should consider what outcomes you're willing to accept. Custody, division of assets, potential alimony," Ms. Taylor explained, her tone neutral. Ronald nodded, his mind racing with the legal jargon and its implications. "I just want what's best for the girls. Everything else is secondary." "That's a good perspective to have," Ms. Taylor responded, jotting down notes. "Let's prepare for the different scenarios, but hopefully it won't come to a contentious divorce." As Ronald left the lawyer's office, he felt a sense of resolve forming amidst the chaos. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional and legal battles, but he was determined to emerge from this crisis with his integrity and his daughter's well-being intact. The fallout was just beginning, but Ronald was ready to face whatever came next, supported by his family and armed with a clearer understanding of his legal rights and responsibilities. The seasons shifted, and with the arrival of spring came a sense of renewal that Ronald clung to as he navigated the aftermath of his marital crisis. The house, once suffused with tension and sadness, gradually began to feel like a home again, though the absence of Penelope left a palpable void. Ronald spent many evenings discussing the future with Roxy and Rachel, ensuring they felt secure and loved despite the uncertainties. One such evening, while sitting in the garden watching the girls play, Ronald reflected on the conversations he had had with Penelope over the past weeks. They had been difficult, fraught with emotion, but necessary for closure and for plotting a path forward. "Daddy, are you okay?" Rachel's voice broke through his reverie, her young face etched with concern. Ronald smiled, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I'm getting there, sweetheart. Every day feels a little better." he reassured her, feeling the truth of his words. How about you girls? How are you feeling about everything? Roxy, ever the more outspoken, shrugged. It's weird without Mom around all the time, but Aunt Linda's been fun, and I like that we're doing more stuff together, just us. It's like we're a team, right? Ronald said, trying to foster a sense of unity. Yeah, Team Ronald? Rachel giggled, and even Roxy cracked a smile. Their laughter was healing, and Ronald felt a surge of determination to keep this positive momentum going. He had begun attending counseling sessions to work through his feelings of betrayal and to learn how to better communicate and cope as a single parent. These sessions often gave him insights that he used to strengthen his bond with his daughters. I've been thinking, Ronald began one afternoon as they sat down for a weekend lunch, about taking a short trip during your next school break. Just the three of us. Maybe to the mountains? We could go hiking and camping. That sounds awesome! Roxy exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. Rachel nodded vigorously, the prospect of an adventure lighting up her face. The logistics of divorce had been complicated. Ronald met regularly with his lawyer, Miss Taylor, who guided him through the process with a firm yet empathetic hand. During one meeting, she laid out the final steps. You're almost through, Ronald. How are you holding up? Miss Taylor asked as they reviewed documents. It's been tough, but I'm focused on the future now, Ronald replied, signing a paper with a steady hand. I'm ready to start this new chapter for me and the girls. That's the spirit, Miss Taylor smiled. Once this is all finalized, you'll have a fresh start. Just remember, it's okay to take it one day at a time. As the divorce proceedings drew to a close, Ronald prepared to talk to Penelope about co-parenting arrangements. They met in a quiet cafe, a neutral space that made the conversation a little easier. Ronald, I just want to say I'm sorry again for everything, Penelope said softly, stirring her coffee nervously. I know, Penelope, and I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine and the girls. We need to focus on what's best for Roxy and Rachel now, Ronald said, his voice calm and resolute. I agree. I want to be a part of their lives, to help raise them, even if it's not in the way we originally planned, Penelope responded, her voice tinged with regret, but also hope. We'll make it work. We'll schedule weekends, holidays. We'll be flexible. The most important thing is that Roxy and Rachel feel loved and supported by both of us, Ronald outlined, his tone pragmatic yet compassionate. As Ronald walked back to his car, a sense of peace settled over him. The path ahead would not be without its challenges, but he felt equipped to face them. He was not just rebuilding his life, he was redefining it, embracing his role as a father, and finding joy in the new beginnings that each day brought. Hey listeners, if you enjoyed this video and want to stay up to date with our latest content, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. You definitely won't want to miss what's coming up next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with sweet cheating stories.